and had learned that the best response to contempt was simply to wait for the truth to speak for itself. Outside, the sound of an approaching vehicle could be heard. Doors opening, footsteps on pavement moving quickly. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking each second. Each second bringing closer the moment that would change everything. Victor Hartman did not know it yet. But his career, his reputation, his entire understanding of the world was about to come crashing down around him. And it would happen in the next few minutes. At that very moment, 35 floors above the streets of downtown Los Angeles, the executive suite of Pacific Trust Bank Tower erupted into chaos. Catherine Wells sat behind her mahogany desk reviewing quarterly projections when her private phone rang. She glanced at the screen and saw a name that made her heart skip a beat. Keanu. In the 4 years since Keanu Reeves had hired her to run Pacific Trust Bank, he had called this number perhaps a dozen times. He was not the kind of owner who micromanaged or demanded constant updates. He trusted her to do her job, and she had never given him reason to doubt that trust. But something in his voice when she answered told her this was not a routine call. "Catherine, this is Keanu. I am at the downtown branch. I need you here immediately, and bring Robert if he is in the office." His tone was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes not from peace but from carefully controlled anger. In 4 years of working with him, Catherine had never heard that particular quality in his voice before. "I understand," she said. "I will be there right away." She hung up the phone and sat motionless for a moment, her face draining of color. Then she moved. "Lisa," she called to her assistant as she grabbed her jacket. "Contact Robert Kingston and tell him to meet me in the lobby immediately, and pull all security footage from the downtown branch for the past hour." "Everything?" Lisa looked up, startled by the urgency in her boss's voice. "Is everything all right? What happened?" Catherine was already halfway to the door. Someone just made the biggest mistake of their career. 3 floors down in the Security Monitoring Center, Head of Security Marcus Webb was executing Catherine's orders with military precision. His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up multiple camera feeds from the downtown branch onto the wall of screens before him. When the footage began to play, the room fell silent. On the screens, crystal clear in high definition, they watched a man in shabby clothes standing at the teller counter. A man that everyone in that monitoring room recognized instantly despite the unkempt beard and worn baseball cap. "Dear God," Marcus breathed. "That is Keanu Reeves." A junior security officer leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "Are you sure? Look at how he is dressed. He looks like I know what he looks like." Marcus cut him off, "But that is definitely him. I have seen him in person at board meetings. That is the owner of this bank." They watched in horrified silence as the scene unfolded. They heard Victor Hartman tell Keanu. He looked like someone who should be begging for change on a street corner. They watched Derek Mills and Rachel Foster laugh and mock. They heard every insult, saw every sneer, witnessed every moment of the systematic humiliation. They called the owner of the bank a potential thief. The junior officer whispered, his face pale. They told him to go to a pawn shop. Marcus was already reaching for the phone. "Get legal up here, get HR, and make sure every second of this footage is preserved and backed up. We are going to need it." Back in the downtown branch, Victor Hartman's confidence had returned. 10 minutes had passed since Keanu's phone call, and nothing had happened. No cavalry had arrived. No mysterious friend had appeared. The scruffy man still stood at the counter, but now Victor was certain he had been bluffing all along. "So," Victor said with a smug smile, "your friend seems to be running late. What a surprise." He turned to Tommy Chen, who still stood uncertainly nearby. "Tommy, I have been patient enough. Remove this man from the premises." "Now," Derek Mills snickered. "I knew he was bluffing. People like him always do that, pretending to know important people. Rachel Foster nodded. We should have called the police from the beginning. Keanu remained perfectly still. He did not argue. He did not plead. He simply glanced at the clock on the wall, then looked toward the main entrance. About 30 seconds now, he said quietly. Victor laughed. 30 seconds until what? A miracle? Something like that. Victor opened his mouth to deliver another cutting remark, but he never got the chance. Exactly 30 seconds later, the main doors of Pacific Trust Bank burst open with such force that they slammed against the walls. The sound echoed through the marble lobby like thunder. Catherine Wells strode into the bank. She was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, her heels clicking sharply against the stone floor with each purposeful step. Her face was set in an expression of cold fury that made the temperature in the lobby seem to drop several degrees. Behind her came Robert Kingston, the 60-year-old chairman of the board of directors. His silver hair immaculate and his eyes sharp as steel. 2 other board members followed along with the head of the legal department. They moved like an army advancing into battle. Every activity in the bank froze. Customers stopped mid-transaction. Tellers stopped breathing. Even the soft hum of the cash-counting machines seemed to fall silent. All eyes turned to the group of executives who had just invaded the lobby with the force of a natural disaster. Catherine's eyes swept across the room, searching when her gaze found Keanu standing calmly at the counter in his worn clothes. Something in her expression shifted. Saint Ivana Stup. IGHT now. Her voice rang out like a thunderclap, silencing every whisper, freezing every movement. Victor Hartman, for the first time in his 12 years at Pacific Trust Bank, looked like a deer caught in headlights. He recognized Catherine Wells. Of course, he did. She was the CEO of the entire institution, but he could not understand why she was here in his branch unannounced. And he could not understand why she looked so furious. Miss Wells. He forced his face into a welcoming smile and stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. What an unexpected pleasure. How can I help? Catherine walked past him as if he did not exist. She went directly to Cow, her heels echoing in the deathly silence. When she reached him, her entire demeanor transformed. The cold fury melted into something that looked very much like respect, perhaps even reverence. Sir, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent lobby. I am deeply sorry for what has happened here today. On behalf of Pacific Trust Bank, I offer my sincerest apologies. The shift in her attitude sent shock waves through the room. The CEO of a major bank was apologizing to a man who looked like he lived on the streets. Customers exchanged bewildered glances. Tellers whispered to each other. Something was very, very wrong with the picture. They thought they understood. Victor's smile faltered. Miss Wells, I do not understand. This man was attempting to make a suspicious transaction. I was simply following protocol. Catherine turned to face him. Her eyes were like razors. Silence. One word. Just one word. But it carried the weight of a death sentence. Victor's mouth snapped shut. Catherine turned to face the assembled staff of the downtown branch. Derek Mills had shrunk back against the counter, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. Rachel Foster was trembling visibly, tears already forming in her eyes. Melissa Turner gripped the edge of her counter as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Tommy Chen had retreated to a corner, trying to make himself invisible. Do any of you know who this man is? Catherine asked, her voice eerily calm. The man you have spent the last hour humiliating. Silence. Nobody dared to speak. This, Catherine said, gesturing toward Keanu, is Keanu Reeves. The name meant nothing to them. Or rather, it meant something, but not something that made sense. Keanu Reeves was a movie star. Keanu Reeves wore designer clothes to premieres and drove expensive cars. Keanu Reeves did not stand in bank lobbies wearing stained hoodies and ripped jeans. Catherine continued, her voice rising to ensure everyone in the lobby could hear every word. Keanu Reeves is not just the Hollywood actor you might know from The Matrix or John Wick. He is the majority owner of Pacific Trust Bank. He owns 51% of this institution. Every paycheck you receive, every bonus you earn, every benefit you enjoy comes from his investment in this company. She paused, letting the words sink in. He is, in the most literal sense possible, the man who pays your salaries. Time stopped. Victor Hartman's face went white. His knees seemed to buckle beneath him, and he had to grab the counter to keep from falling. Derek Mills clapped a hand over his mouth, his eyes wide with horror. Rachel Foster burst into tears on the spot, her body shaking with sobs. Melissa Turner looked like she might faint. No, Victor whispered, his voice barely audible. That is not. I did not. It cannot be. Robert Kingston stepped forward. At 60 years old, with his silver hair and stern demeanor, he was known throughout the company as a man of few words and absolute standards. When he spoke, his voice was cold enough to freeze water. Victor Hartman, 12 years at Pacific Trust Bank. 12 years building your career. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. And in 45 minutes, you destroyed it all. Victor fell to his knees. Literally fell. His expensive suit crumpling against the marble floor. Mr. Reeves, Mr. Clear's throat, Kingston, please let me explain. Explain what? Robert's voice was merciless. That you told the owner of this bank he looked like he should be begging for change on a street corner. That you suggested he take his business to a pawn shop. That you said this branch does not serve people like him. Each question landed like a physical blow. Victor flinched with every word. We have everything on camera, Catherine added. Every word, every action, every contemptuous smile. Derek Mills, desperate to save himself, stepped forward with his hands raised. I was just following Victor's lead, he said quickly, his voice cracking. The culture here, the way we were trained. Catherine cut him off. The culture did not force you to say a customer might be carrying diseases. That was your choice. Your words, your cruelty. Rachel Foster was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. I am so sorry, she sobbed. I did not know. If I had known it was Mr. Reeves, I never would have. That, said Keanu Reeves, speaking for the first time since Catherine's arrival, is exactly the problem. His voice was calm, quiet, but it carried through the silent lobby with perfect clarity, and something in his tone made everyone stop and listen. You would not have treated me this way if you knew who I was, Keanu continued, looking directly at Rachel. But you were perfectly willing to treat me this way when you thought I was nobody, when you thought I was just some poor man who wandered in off the street. He paused, letting his words settle over the room. The issue is not that you disrespected someone rich and powerful. The issue is that you disrespected a human being because you thought he was beneath you, because his clothes were worn, because his appearance did not meet your standards. You decided I had no value, no dignity, no right to basic courtesy, simply because I did not look wealthy. Rachel's sobs grew louder, but Keanu was not finished. What about all the other people you have treated this way? The ones who really are struggling. The elderly couple who waited over an hour while wealthy customers were served immediately. The construction worker you humiliated for trying to deposit his honest earnings. They do not have the power to hold you accountable. But they felt the same pain. They experienced the same humiliation. They just had to walk away and carry that wound with them. The lobby was utterly silent. Even the crying had stopped. Every person in the room hung on Keanu's words. His eyes moved to Melissa Turner, who stood frozen behind her counter, tears streaming silently down her pale face. "Miss Turner," he said. Melissa flinched as if struck. She raised her eyes to meet his, and he could see the fear there. The guilt, the shame. "You did not say the worst things today," Keanu acknowledged. "You did not call me names or suggest I was diseased or tell me to leave. But you also did not speak up. You knew what was happening was wrong. I could see it in your eyes. You were uncomfortable. You wanted it to stop, but you stayed silent. I was afraid." Melissa whispered, her voice breaking. "I am new here. I need this job. I did not want to lose it." "I understand," Keanu said. And there was genuine compassion in his voice. "That is a difficult position. But you need to understand something important. Staying silent in the face of wrongdoing is its own form of participation. When we see injustice and say nothing, we give it permission to continue." Melissa nodded, tears falling freely. She did not try to excuse herself. She did not try to shift blame. She simply stood there and accepted the truth of what he was saying. The lobby of Pacific Trust Bank had transformed into something resembling a courtroom. Victor Hartman knelt on the marble floor, his 12-year career in ruins around him. Derek Mills and Rachel Foster stood trembling, waiting to learn their fates. Melissa Turner wept silently at her station. Customers and employees alike stood frozen, witnesses to a moment that none of them would ever forget. And at the center of it all stood Keanu Reeves, the man they had dismissed as a homeless stranger, the man they had mocked and insulted and tried to throw out of the building. He stood there now with the quiet dignity of someone who had never needed external validation, who had never measured his worth by the clothes he wore or the money in his account. He stood there like a king in his own kingdom, though he had never asked for a crown. The question that hung in the air, unspoken, but understood by everyone present, was simple. What would happen next? The air in the bank lobby had grown heavy, thick with anticipation and dread. Everyone present knew what was coming. They had all witnessed scenes like this before in movies, in television dramas, in their own imaginations. The powerful man reveals his identity. The arrogant employees grovel for forgiveness. And then comes the satisfying moment of retribution, the decisive termination, the careers destroyed with a single word. Catherine Wells stood ready to execute whatever decision Keanu made. Robert Kingston had already mentally drafted the termination paperwork. The legal team was prepared to handle any complications. Everything was in place for swift, decisive justice, but Keanu Reeves had never been one to do what everyone expected. He stood in the center of the lobby, surrounded by the wreckage of what had been a normal Tuesday morning at Pacific Trust Bank. Before him knelt Victor Hartman, the man who had called him a street beggar. Behind him trembled Derek Mills, Rachel Foster, and Melissa Turner, each waiting to learn their fate. Around them, customers and other employees watched in frozen silence, witnesses to a drama none of them had anticipated. When Keanu finally spoke, his voice was calm and measured. "I would like everyone directly involved in this incident to follow me to the conference room. Victor, Derek, Rachel, Melissa," he paused. "Catherine and Robert as well." Catherine exchanged a glance with Robert. This was unexpected. Terminations were usually handled quickly, publicly as a message to others. Taking the offenders to a private room suggested something different was about to happen. They followed Keanu through the back corridor to the branch's main conference room. The door closed behind them, separating them from the watching eyes outside. The room was large, designed for important meetings with wealthy clients. A long mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs. Certificates and awards decorated the walls. Testimonials to the branch's success and excellence. The irony was not lost on anyone present. Victor, Derek, Rachel, and Melissa sat on one side of the table, arranged like defendants before a tribunal. Their faces bore the same expression, a mixture of terror, shame, and desperate hope that somehow someway they might survive this. Catherine and Robert sat on the opposite side, ready to carry out whatever sentence Keanu pronounced. Keanu himself remained standing at the head of the table. Victor was the first to break the silence. His voice cracked as he spoke. All traces of his earlier arrogance stripped away. "Mr. Reeves, I am begging you. Please, 12 years. I have given 12 years to this company. I have a wife. I have children. They depend on me." Tears streamed down his face. Genuine tears of a man watching his entire life crumble before his eyes. "Please just give me one chance. One chance to make this right." Keanu looked at him for a long moment before responding. "Victor, my question is not about your family or your years of service. My question is this." He leaned forward slightly. "How many people have you treated the way you treated me today? In 12 years, how many customers have walked into this branch and been humiliated, dismissed, or turned away because they did not look wealthy enough for you?" Victor opened his mouth, but no words came out. "How many elderly couples were made to wait for hours while you rushed to serve people with expensive watches? How many working-class families were questioned and suspected simply because their clothes had stains from honest labor? How many people walked out of this bank feeling worthless, feeling like they did not matter, feeling like they were less than human?" Robert Kingston spoke up, his voice grave. "The data supports what you are describing. This branch has the highest customer attrition rate in our entire system. 23% in 6 months. And when we disaggregate the numbers, the pattern is clear. Customers who do not fit a certain profile of wealth are leaving at 3 times the rate of others. 23%. Keanu repeated that represents thousands of people. Thousands of human beings who came to this bank and left feeling disrespected, unwelcome or ashamed. And those are just the ones who left. How many stayed but carry the memory of being treated as less than?" The room fell silent. There was no defense against numbers. No excuse that could explain away thousands of dissatisfied customers. Then Keanu said something that no one in that room expected. "Catherine. Robert, I know you are waiting for me to give the order to terminate their employment." Catherine nodded slightly. Robert's expression remained impassive. "Ready to act." "I am not going to do that." The words hung in the air, incomprehensible. Derek looked up, confusion breaking through his terror. Rachel's sobs paused mid-breath. Even Catherine and Robert exchanged startled glances. "What?" Victor whispered, not daring to believe what he had heard. "I said, I am not going to fire you today." Catherine leaned forward. "Keanu, after everything they said to you, after the way they treated you, firing them would be easy." Keanu said, "It would be quick. It would feel satisfying, and by tomorrow, this whole incident would be behind us." He paused, looking at each of the 4 employees in turn. But it would not change anything. Victor would find another job at another bank and continue treating people the same way. Derek and Rachel would learn only that they should be more careful about who they insult. They would not actually become better people. They would just become better at hiding who they really are. He walked slowly around the table, his footsteps the only sound in the room. "I do not want them to hide who they are. I want them to change who they are. And that requires something more difficult than termination. It requires accountability, growth, the hard work of becoming someone different." He stopped at the head of the table and faced them directly. "Here is what is going to happen." Victor straightened in his chair, hardly daring to breathe. "Victor, you have been a manager for 8 years. You have spent 8 years in an office looking at numbers on screens, deciding who deserves attention and who does not based on their appearance and assumed net worth. Starting tomorrow, you will be demoted to the position of entry-level teller. You will work the counter. You will serve every customer who walks through those doors. Regardless of what they look like, what they wear, or how much money they have, your salary will be reduced by 60% to reflect your new position. Victor's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Relief that he was not being fired, shock at the severity of the demotion, and then something else, something that might have been the beginning of understanding. This will continue for 1 year, 12 months. During that time, you will experience firsthand what it means to serve people without judgment. You will look into the eyes of every customer, hear their stories, understand their needs, and perhaps by the end of that year, you will understand why the way you treated people was wrong. Keanu turned to Derek and Rachel. You, too. You joined in the mockery enthusiastically. You called me diseased. You suggested I was a criminal. You laughed while another human being was being humiliated. His voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it. Now, you will continue your jobs here, but you will also perform 20 hours per week of volunteer work. This will be in addition to your regular duties, not instead of them. Derek swallowed hard. Volunteer work? Yes. At 3 different organizations, a homeless shelter, a senior center for elderly people living alone, and a food bank serving low-income families. Keanu's eyes met Derek's. You will spend time with the very people you have been taught to look down upon. You will serve them meals. You will listen to their stories. You will learn that they are human beings with dignity, with histories, with dreams and disappointments just like yours. This will continue for 6 months. I will receive monthly reports from each organization about your attendance and your attitude. If those reports are anything less than exemplary, your employment here ends immediately. Rachel was crying again, but quietly now, tears sliding down her cheeks in silence. Finally, Keanu turned to Melissa. Miss Turner, your situation is different from the others. Melissa looked up. Fear and hope wearing in her eyes. You did not say the cruelest things today. You did not call me names or suggest I was diseased. But you also did not speak up when you could have. You watched injustice happen and you chose silence because it was safer. He paused. I understand why. You are young. You are new. You were afraid. Those are human responses to a difficult situation. Melissa nodded, not trusting herself to speak. You will participate in the volunteer program as well, but only for 3 months. After that I have a different assignment for you. She looked up surprised. I am creating a new position at this company. Someone needs to lead the effort to change the culture here to make sure what happened today never happens again. I want you to lead that effort. Melissa's eyes widened. Me? But I am just a teller. I have only been here 8 months. Which is exactly why you are right for the job. You saw the problem clearly because you had not yet become numb to it. You felt the wrongness of what was happening even if you did not have the courage to speak up. That awareness is valuable. Keanu's voice softened. Sometimes the best people to prevent mistakes are those who have made them and truly understood why they were wrong. He stepped back, addressing all 4 of them together. There is one final condition that applies to everyone. If any of you violate these terms, if any of you return to your old behavior, if you treat any customer with disrespect or discrimination, your employment will be terminated immediately. No warnings, no second chances beyond this one. And there will be no letter of recommendation. You will leave with nothing but the knowledge that you wasted the opportunity you were given. The room was utterly silent. Victor, still processing everything, finally managed to speak. Mr. Reeves, I do not understand. After everything we said to you, after the way we treated you, why are you not simply firing us? It is what we deserve. Keanu was quiet for a
moment, as if considering how to answer. Because firing you is easy for me but meaningless for you. It lets you off the hook. You could tell yourself you were treated unfairly, that you lost your job because you made one mistake, that you are the victim. You would never have to truly confront what you did or why it was wrong. He walked to the window looking out at the city beyond. I believe people can change. I have to believe that because I have needed second chances in my own life. There were times when I made mistakes, when I hurt people, when I fell short of who I wanted to be. And there were people who could have given up on me but chose not to. They gave me the opportunity to do better, to be better. I would not be standing here today without those second chances. He turned back to face them. Today I am giving you that same opportunity. But opportunity without accountability is meaningless. So yes, you get a second chance. But that chance comes with consequences, with requirements, with the hard work of actually changing. If you do the work, if you genuinely learn and grow, then perhaps something good can come from this terrible day. His eyes moved across their faces one by one. But if you cannot change, if this is simply who you are, then the next 12 months will prove that. And then we will all know that the problem was not your environment or your training or your fear. The problem was you. Catherine Wells sat in silence, watching Keanu with new eyes. She had worked with him for 4 years. She had always respected his business acumen, his
integrity, his vision for what Pacific Trust Bank could become. But in this moment, she realized there were depths to this man she had never fully appreciated. Most people in his position would have used their power to destroy those who had wronged them. It would have been justified. It would have been satisfying. It would have been what almost anyone else would have done. Instead, Keanu had chosen to use his power to give them a chance at redemption. Not because they deserved it, but because he believed in the possibility of human change. Robert Kingston, a man known throughout the industry for his strict standards and uncompromising judgments, nodded slowly. This was not the approach he would have taken. But watching Keanu now, listening to his reasoning, Robert found himself moved in ways he had not expected. There is wisdom in this, Robert said quietly. Different, unexpected, but wise. The 4 employees sat in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. They had walked into this room expecting to lose their jobs, their careers, everything they had worked for. Instead, they had been given something far more challenging than termination. They had been given the burden of choice. They could accept these conditions and do the work of becoming better people. Or they could fail and in failing prove that they were never worth saving in the first place. Victor Hartman looked at his hands, the same hands that had held Keanu's driver's license with such contempt just an hour ago. He thought about his wife, his children, the mortgage payment due next week. He thought about the years stretching ahead. Years he had assumed would be filled with continued success and growing wealth. Now those years looked very different, harder, humbler, but also perhaps more honest. "I will do it," he said quietly. "I will do whatever you require," Derek nodded, unable to speak. Rachel wiped her eyes. "Yes, I will do everything you have asked." Melissa simply said, "Thank you. I will not waste this chance." Keanu looked at each of them one final time. "I hope you mean that. Not for my sake, but for yours and for all the customers who will walk through those doors in the days and months and years to come. They deserve to be treated with dignity. Every single one of them. No matter what they look like." He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "One more thing. What happened today will not stay private. I intend to speak publicly about this experience, not to shame you personally, but to start a larger conversation about how we treat each other, how we judge people based on appearance, how institutions can either reinforce or challenge those judgments." He opened the door. "The question for each of you is simple. When that conversation happens, will you be an example of what went wrong or will you be an example of how people can change?" He walked out of the conference room, leaving behind 4 people whose lives had just been irrevocably altered, not destroyed, not ended, altered. And in some ways, that was far more difficult to face than destruction would have been. 1 week after that fateful Tuesday at Pacific Trust Bank, Keanu Reeves stood behind a podium in the main conference center of the bank's headquarters tower. The room was packed with journalists, cameras, and recording devices. News of the incident had already begun to leak, and speculation was rampant. Everyone wanted to know what had really happened and what the famous actor and secret bank owner planned to do about it. Keanu appeared at the podium dressed exactly as the world had always known him. A simple black t-shirt, faded jeans, no jewelry, no designer labels, no attempt to project anything other than who he genuinely was. The contrast between his appearance and the polished corporate setting behind him could not have been more striking. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice calm and measured. "I am here to tell you about something that happened to me last week. Something that I believe is happening to people all across this country every single day in ways that most of us never see or acknowledge." He told the story from the beginning, the customer complaints that had concerned him, his decision to visit his own bank unannounced and unrecognized. The way he had dressed deliberately to look like someone without wealth or status. And then moment by moment, he described what had happened when he walked through those doors. The security footage played on large screens behind him with the consent of everyone involved. The public watched as Victor Hartman told Keanu he looked like he should be begging for change on a street corner. They heard Derek Mills suggest he might be carrying diseases. They saw Rachel Foster wrinkle her nose and suggest calling the police. They witnessed every sneer, every dismissive gesture, every moment of casual cruelty. When the footage ended, Keanu spoke again. "Could have bought anything I wanted that day. I could have walked into any store in this city and been treated like royalty if I had chosen to dress the part. But I did not. And because of that choice, because I looked like someone without money, I was treated as though I had no value, no dignity, no right to basic human respect." He paused, letting his words settle over the room. "If this happened to me, imagine what happens to ordinary people every day. People who cannot reveal a secret identity to make the humiliation stop. People who have to walk away from that counter carrying the weight of being told they do not belong, that they are not worthy, that they should take their business to a pawn shop because places like this are not for people like them." The room was utterly silent. Cameras flashed, but no one spoke. "I am not here to destroy careers or seek revenge," Keanu continued. "The employees involved in this incident have not been fired. Instead, they have been given something much harder than termination. They have been given the opportunity to change along with the accountability to ensure that change is real. Whether they succeed or fail will be their choice." He then announced the creation of a comprehensive initiative called Every Customer Matters. Pacific Trust Bank would invest $30 million in a complete transformation of its culture and practices. The changes would be sweeping. Effective immediately, all VIP rooms and priority lanes based on account balance would be eliminated. Every customer, regardless of appearance or wealth, would be served in the order they arrived. No exceptions. All 5,000 employees across the bank's 200 branches would undergo mandatory training on unconscious bias, the hidden prejudices that shape how we treat people without our even realizing it. A new evaluation system would be implemented. Employee bonuses and promotions would no longer be tied solely to revenue generated from wealthy clients. Instead, they would be based on satisfaction ratings from all customers equally. A direct hotline to the CEO's office would be established, allowing any customer who experienced discrimination to report it immediately and have their complaint taken seriously. And perhaps most significantly, a program called Walk in Their Shoes would require all new employees to spend 1 week posing as low-income customers at various Pacific Trust branches. They would experience firsthand what it felt like to be on the other side of the counter, to be judged by appearance, to be treated as less than. Only after completing this experience would they be allowed to serve customers themselves. The press conference made national news. But what captured the public's imagination was not the corporate initiative or the investment dollars. It was the simple humanity of a man who had been humiliated and chose education over retribution. 6 months passed. In that time, the lives of 4 people were irrevocably transformed. Victor Hartman had spent 6 months working as an entry-level teller at the very counter where he had once lorded his authority over others. The first few weeks had been agony. Every day he had to face customers knowing that many of them had seen the viral video, had watched him humiliate a man he thought was beneath him. The shame was suffocating. But something began to shift in the 3rd month. It started with a small interaction. An elderly woman, perhaps 75 years old, approached his window. She was dressed in clothes that had been mended many times, and she carried a worn envelope in her weathered hands. "I would like to deposit this, please," she said softly. Victor took the envelope. Inside was $50 in small bills. Before his demotion, Victor would have processed this transaction with barely concealed impatience. $50 was nothing, a waste of his time, a distraction from the clients who actually mattered. But now something made him pause. "May I ask what this is for?" he said gently. The woman's face lit up with a smile that transformed her tired features. "It is for my granddaughter. She wants to be a doctor someday. I save $50 every month from my pension. It is not much, but in 18 years, maybe it will help her with school." Victor looked at the $50 in his hands. For the first time in his career, he truly saw what it represented. Not a trivial sum, not a waste of time, but hope, sacrifice, love. "That is wonderful," he said and meant it. "She is lucky to have a grandmother like you." The woman's eyes glistened. "Most people just take the money and hand me a receipt." "Thank you for asking." That night, Victor went home and wept. In an internal interview conducted for the company's training materials, Victor spoke about his transformation. "For 12 years, I looked at numbers on a screen and thought I understood banking. I did not understand anything. Those numbers represent people. Real people with real lives, real dreams, real struggles. That woman and her $50 taught me more about what this job should mean than all my years in a corner office." When his year of demotion ended, Victor was offered his management position back. He declined. "I prefer being close to the customers," he explained. "That is where the real work happens. That is where I can actually make a difference in someone's day." Derek Mills completed his 6 months of volunteer work as required. The experience at the homeless shelter had shaken him in ways he had not anticipated. He met men and women who had once held jobs like his, who had families and homes and futures until illness or accident or simple bad luck had taken everything away. One man in particular stayed with him. His name was Michael, and he had been a financial analyst before his wife's cancer diagnosis and the medical bills that followed wiped out everything they had. "I used to look at people like me and think they must have done something wrong to end up here," Michael told him one evening. "Bad choices, laziness, something. Because I needed to believe there was a wall between them and me, that I was safe, that it could never happen to someone like me." Derek could not get those words out of his head. When he returned to Pacific Trust Bank, Derek requested a transfer to a new role. He became the branch's specialist for elderly customers and those facing financial hardship. The same man who had once mocked a customer for potentially carrying diseases now spent his days helping people navigate difficult situations with patience and compassion. Rachel Foster's story ended differently. After 2 months of volunteer work, Rachel submitted her resignation. The experience had not hardened her or left her unchanged. Quite the opposite. She had changed so much that she could no longer face the place where she had revealed the ugliest parts of herself. In her resignation letter, she wrote, "Every time I walk into this branch, I hear my own voice saying those terrible things. I see myself wrinkling my nose at a man I assumed was beneath me. I cannot escape it here. I need to start over somewhere else, somewhere I can be the person I want to become without being haunted by the person I was. Thank you, Mr. Reeves, for not firing me that day. The lesson you taught will stay with me forever, even if I cannot stay here to prove it. Keanu did not try to convince her to remain. Sometimes real change requires leaving the past behind entirely. He wished her well. Melissa Turner's journey was perhaps the most remarkable of all. After completing her 3 months of volunteer work, she threw herself into the new role Keanu had assigned her. As Director of Service Culture, she developed and implemented the Walk in Their Shoes program that would become a model for the entire banking industry. New employees spent their first week disguised as customers of limited means. They wore modest clothes, carried worn wallets, and attempted to conduct basic transactions at branches where no one knew who they were. Many of them experienced exactly what Keanu had experienced. The dismissive looks, the suspicious questions, the subtle and not so subtle signals that they were not welcome. The effect was transformative. Employees who went through the program reported fundamental shifts in how they perceived and treated customers. They had felt the sting of judgment, the weight of condescension, the humiliation of being treated as less than, and they carried that understanding with them into every interaction thereafter. In a speech to new hires, Melissa shared her own story without reservation. I was there that day. I watched it happen. I knew it was wrong and I said nothing because I was afraid. Mr. Reeves could have fired me and I would have deserved it. Instead, he saw something in me that I did not see in myself. He saw someone who could learn, who could grow, who could help make sure that what happened to him never happens to anyone else in our branches. She paused, looking out at the faces before her. Being silent in the face of injustice is not neutral. It is a choice. It is a choice to let wrong things happen because stopping them is uncomfortable or risky or hard. I made that choice once. I will never make it again. And I am here to make sure you understand that choice before you ever have to face it. 1 year after the incident, Keanu Reeves returned to the downtown Los Angeles branch of Pacific Trust Bank. He wore the same faded gray hoodie, the same ripped jeans, the same scuffed sneakers. His beard was unkempt, his hair pulled back in a messy ponytail beneath a worn baseball cap. He looked exactly as he had on that Tuesday morning 12 months before. He walked through the revolving doors, took a number, and waited his turn. A young teller named Jenny, who had joined the bank just 4 months earlier, called his number. She smiled warmly as he approached her window. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" There was no hesitation in her voice, no suspicion in her eyes, no quick assessment of his clothes or appearance to determine how much respect he deserved, just genuine warmth extended to a fellow human being. "I would like to make a withdrawal, please," Keanu said. $100. Jenny processed the transaction quickly and professionally. "Here you are, sir. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Keanu looked at her for a long moment. This young woman had no idea who he was. She did not know he owned the bank. She did not know about the incident a year ago or the viral video or any of it. She was simply treating him the way she had been trained to treat everyone who walked through those doors, with dignity, with respect, with basic human decency. "No thank you," Keanu said. "You have been wonderful." He turned to leave, then paused. He reached into his pocket, pulled out an envelope he had prepared, and placed it on the counter. "This is for you," he said quietly. Inside the envelope was $1,000 in cash and a handwritten note. "Thank you for treating me like a human being. That is all anyone really needs." Jenny stared at the envelope confused, then looked up to ask the man what he meant, but he was already walking toward the exit. Just another unremarkable figure in worn clothes disappearing through the revolving doors. Later that evening, Keanu sat for an interview that would air on national television. The host asked him the question that everyone wanted answered. Why did you not just fire them after what they did to you? After the way they humiliated you, why give them a second chance? Keanu was quiet for a moment before responding because firing someone does not change them. It just moves the problem somewhere else. Victor would have gotten another job at another bank and treated people the same way. Derek and Rachel would have learned only to be more careful about who they insulted. Nothing would have actually gotten better. He leaned forward slightly. I believe in second chances. I have to because I have needed them in my own life. There were times when I was lost, when I made mistakes, when I hurt people I cared about. And there were people who could have walked away from me but did not. They gave me the chance to do better. To be better, I would not be here without those chances. But how do you know when someone deserves a second chance? The host asked. You do not know. Keanu admitted. You can never know for certain. Some people will take that chance and waste it. Others will take it and transform completely. The only way to find out is to offer the chance and see what they do with it. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Wealth does not make anyone more valuable. Appearance does not reveal character. If you only treat people with respect when you discover they are rich or powerful, that is not respect at all. That is calculation. That is self-interest. Real respect is what you give to people when you think they have nothing to offer you in return. The interview ended, but Keanu's words continued to resonate across the country. The story of what happened at Pacific Trust Bank spread far beyond the financial industry. It became a case study in business schools, a topic of discussion in corporate boardrooms, a reference point in conversations about how we treat each other in everyday life. But perhaps its most lasting impact was in the small moments that no one ever saw or recorded. A bank teller in Ohio who watched the video and reconsidered how she had been treating certain customers. A store manager in Florida who implemented his own version of the walk in their shoes program. A father in Michigan who used the story to teach his children about judging people by their character rather than their appearance. Change Keanu had learned rarely comes from grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. It comes from the accumulation of small choices made by ordinary people in moments when no one is watching. The story of Keanu Reeves and Pacific Trust Bank spread across America, but not because of revenge or dramatic firings. It spread because it offered something rarer than entertainment. It offered a different way of thinking about power, about justice, about what it means to be human. Some people have power and use it to destroy those who wrong them. That is one choice. Others have power and use it to give people the chance to become better than they were. That is another choice. Keanu Reeves made the second choice. Not because the people who humiliated him deserved it, but because he believed in the possibility of transformation, because he understood that true strength is not measured by your ability to punish, but by your willingness to extend grace even when grace is not owed. The question this story leaves with each of us is simple. When you have power over someone who has wronged you, what choice will you make? And perhaps more importantly, when you encounter someone who appears to have nothing, someone in worn clothes with tired eyes and empty pockets, how will you treat them? Because you never truly know who someone is based on how they look. And you never know who you are becoming based on how you treat people who cannot do anything for you. That is the lesson Keanu Reeves taught a bank full of people who had forgotten it. That is the lesson he hoped the world would remember. And if even one person who hears this story treats a stranger with a little more kindness tomorrow, then perhaps everything that happened on that Tuesday morning was worth it after. You look like you should be begging for change on a street corner, not standing here demanding money. Those were the exact words a bank manager said to a man in a worn hoodie and ripped jeans who walked in asking to withdraw $25,000. The staff laughed. They called him diseased. They threatened to call the police. What they did not know was that this homeless man owned 51% of the entire bank. He was their boss. He signed their paychecks and he had just witnessed everything. But here is the shocking part. He did not fire them. What he did instead changed their lives forever, and it might just change the way you see the world too. This is the true story of Keanu Reeves and the day he walked into his own bank and was treated like he was worthless. Most people know Keanu as the Hollywood actor who brought Neo to life in The Matrix and turned John Wick into a cultural phenomenon. What most people do not know is that Keanu is also a quiet private investor who prefers to keep his business dealings far from the spotlight. 5 years before the events of this story, Keanu made a decision that would remain one of the best-kept secrets in the financial world. Through his private investment company, Arch Motorcycle Holdings LLC, he acquired 51% of Pacific Trust Bank, one of the largest regional banks on the West Coast with over 200 branches across California, Oregon, and Washington. Only 3 people knew about this arrangement. Catherine Wells, the CEO whom Keanu personally hired to run the bank, his personal attorney who handled the paperwork, and Robert Kingston, the chairman of the board of directors. Why the secrecy? Because Keanu Reeves has never been the kind of man who flaunts his wealth. He is the same man who rides the subway, gives up his seat to strangers, and donates millions to children's hospitals without ever putting his name on the buildings. For Keanu, owning a bank was never about power or prestige. It was about creating something that could genuinely help people manage their money with dignity and respect. But lately, something had been troubling him. Catherine Wells had been sending him concerning reports. Customer attrition at Pacific Trust Bank had increased by 23% over the past 6 months. But what troubled Keanu more than the statistics were the stories hidden behind them. Anonymous complaints had been filtering in customers who felt they had been treated poorly. Elderly clients who said they were ignored while wealthier-looking patrons were served first. Working-class families who felt unwelcome. People who left Pacific Trust Bank not because of fees or interest rates, but because they simply did not feel respected. Keanu could have delegated the problem to Catherine and her team. But that was not his way. He had always believed that the only way to truly understand a problem was to experience it firsthand. So, he made a decision that would change everything. On a quiet Tuesday morning, Keanu Reeves stepped through the revolving doors of the flagship downtown Los Angeles branch of Pacific Trust Bank. The branch occupied the ground floor of a gleaming tower, all polished marble floors and soaring ceilings designed to project prosperity and success. But anyone who glanced at the man walking through those doors would have seen none of that prosperity reflected back at them. Keanu had dressed deliberately for this visit. He wore a faded gray hoodie, the fabric worn thin at the elbows with a few small stains that suggested it had seen better days. His jeans were frayed at the hem and torn at one knee, not in the fashionable way, but in the way that comes from years of actual wear. His sneakers were old and scuffed, the soles worn down from countless miles. He had not shaved in nearly 2 weeks, and his beard had grown thick and unkempt, covering much of his face. His long, dark hair was pulled back in a loose, messy ponytail beneath a worn baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He carried no watch, no jewelry, just an old canvas backpack slung over one shoulder. In short, Keanu Reeves looked like a man who might be living on the streets, like someone who had wandered in from the park. Perhaps looking for a warm place to sit. That was entirely the point. Instead of approaching the counter immediately, Keanu took a seat in the waiting area near the entrance. He noticed how a security guard glanced his way, eyes lingering with suspicion before looking away. A well-dressed woman nearby gathered her belongings and moved to a seat farther from him. These small reactions told him everything about how he was being perceived. He pulled out his phone and pretended to scroll through it, but his eyes were watching everything. What he witnessed over the next 45 minutes would stay with him forever. The first thing he noticed was the arrival of a businessman in an expensive tailored suit. Before the man had even fully entered the lobby, a bank employee rushed over to greet him with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir. Right this way, please." The businessman was escorted directly to a private office, bypassing the line entirely. No number, no wait, just immediate, personalized service. A few minutes later, an elderly couple walked in. They were perhaps in their 70s, dressed in simple, clean clothes that spoke of modest means. The woman clutched her purse close. The man walked with careful, slow steps. No one rushed to greet them. A teller barely looked up and pointed toward a machine by the wall. Take a number and have a seat. No smile, no warmth, just a dismissive gesture. Keanu watched as the couple made their way slowly to the seating area. They would wait for over an hour before being served. The pattern continued with each new customer. A young construction worker in dusty clothes approached the counter to make a simple deposit. The teller examined his cash with suspicion, held each bill up to the light, and asked him repeatedly where the money had come from. His face flushed with humiliation as other customers stared. A 2-minute transaction stretched to nearly 15. A middle-aged woman attempted to open a savings account. She had all the required documents and enough money for the deposit. But the teller frowned, conferred with a colleague in whispers, and told her that her application would need additional review. She should come back another day. Then a young woman walked in wearing designer clothes and carrying an expensive handbag. She was served in under 3 minutes. The teller chatting pleasantly with her, laughing as if they were old friends. Keanu counted the interactions. 5 customers who appeared wealthy received immediate friendly service. 5 customers who appeared working class or elderly were made to wait, questioned extensively or treated with barely concealed contempt. The discrimination was not subtle. It was systematic. And it was happening in his bank under his watch. After 45 minutes of observation, Keanu stood up and walked toward the teller windows. He approached the counter staffed by a young woman whose name plate read Melissa Turner. She appeared to be in her mid-20s. When Keanu had watched her earlier, she had been laughing with her colleagues, her smile bright and genuine. That smile vanished the moment she saw him. Melissa's eyes traveled from his cap down to his stained hoodie, past his ripped jeans, and finally to his scuffed sneakers. Her expression shifted rapidly from surprise to confusion to something that looked very much like disgust. She did not greet him with a smile. She did not welcome him to Pacific Trust Bank. "Can I help you?" she said, her voice noticeably cold. "I would like to make a withdrawal, please," Keanu said. Calmly. He slid his driver's license and a withdrawal slip across the counter. On the slip written clearly was the amount. $25,000. Melissa picked up the slip. Her eyes widened. She looked at the number, then at CU, then back at the number. "You want to withdraw $25,000. She said it loudly. Louder than necessary. Loud enough that heads turned throughout the lobby. Loud enough that her colleagues stopped what they were doing to stare. "That is correct," Keanu said evenly. Melissa did not process the transaction. Instead, she turned to her colleague at the next window, a man named Derek Mills, and whispered just loudly enough to be overheard. "Derek, this guy wants $25,000. Look at him. He probably stole someone's card." Derek looked over and laughed. His eyes traveled over Keanu with undisguised contempt. "Call Victor and be careful. Who knows what he has in that backpack?" Another employee, Rachel Foster, wandered over to see the commotion. She took one look at Keanu and wrinkled her nose. "Should we call the police? People like this should not be allowed to just walk in." The words hung in the air. People like this. 3 words that reduced a human being to a stereotype. Keanu stood perfectly still, his face revealing nothing. But behind his eyes, he was taking careful note of everything. "I have provided my identification," he said, voice still calm. "I have filled out the withdrawal slip. I am a customer of this bank. Is there a problem?" Melissa did not answer. She picked up her phone and dialed an internal extension. "Victor, there is a situation at my window." She hung up and turned back to Keanu with a thin smile. "The manager will be with you shortly." The door to the back office opened and a man emerged. Victor Hartman was 45 years old and had worked at Pacific Trust Bank for 12 years, managing this flagship branch for the past 8. He was the picture of professional success, from his tailored navy suit to his gold Rolex. His silver-streaked hair was perfectly styled. Everything about him projected authority and superiority. He strode across the marble floor with the confident gait of a man who had never had his authority questioned. His eyes found Keanu immediately, and without even attempting to understand the situation, he made his judgment in an instant. Victor approached the counter, positioned himself beside Melissa, and looked at Keanu with the kind of smile people use when they are about to enjoy delivering bad news. "So," Victor Hartman said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are the one causing trouble." Victor Hartman was a man who had spent his entire career learning to read people. Or at least that is what he believed. In his 12 years at Pacific Trust Bank, he had developed what he considered an infallible instinct for determining who deserved his attention and who did not. Wealth and his experience had a certain look. Success carried a particular scent, and the man standing before him possessed neither. Victor picked up Keanu's driver's license from the counter, holding it between two fingers as if it were something distasteful. He glanced at the name, glanced at the photo, and then looked at the man before him with an expression of exaggerated skepticism. "Mr. Reeves," he said, pronouncing the name with a mocking lilt. $25,000 is a significant amount of money. May I ask what you intend to do with such a large sum?" Keanu met his gaze steadily. "It is my money. I do not believe I need to explain what I plan to do with it." Victor's smile tightened. "Ah, but you see, we have a responsibility to ensure financial security. With transactions of this unusual nature, we must exercise caution." "Unusual in what way?" Keanu asked. "I have an account here. I have sufficient funds. I wish to make a withdrawal. There is nothing unusual about that." Victor leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to create the illusion of confidentiality while ensuring that every employee within earshot could hear every word. "Mr. Reeves, let me be direct with you. Looking at you," he paused, allowing his eyes to travel deliberately from Keanu's worn cap to his stained hoodie to his ripped jeans to his scuffed sneakers. The examination was slow, thorough, and designed to humiliate. "You do not look like someone who has $25,000 in a bank account. Frankly, you look more like someone who should be asking for spare change on a street corner than standing here, demanding a withdrawal." Laughter erupted from behind him. Derek Mills made no effort to hide his amusement. Rachel Foster covered her mouth with her hand, but her shoulders shook with barely suppressed giggles. Keanu did not flinch. His expression remained calm, his posture unchanged, but something flickered behind his eyes, a quiet noting of every word, every laugh, every smirk. "I would like to complete my transaction," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I have provided proper identification. I have filled out the required forms. Please process my withdrawal." Victor let out a short, sharp laugh. "Process your withdrawal? Do you think I was born yesterday?" He shook his head slowly as if dealing with a particularly slow child. "I have been in banking for 12 years. 12 years. I know who belongs in a place like this and who does not." He pointed a finger directly at Keanu's chest. "And you, sir, do not belong here." The lobby had grown silent. Other customers had stopped their transactions to watch the confrontation unfold. Tellers froze at their windows. Even the soft hum of the cash-counting machines seemed to fade into the background. The only sound was Victor Hartman's voice, confident and cruel, echoing off the marble walls. At that moment, a well-dressed man who had been waiting near the private banking offices stepped forward. His suit was impeccably tailored, his watch expensive, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. Everything about him announced wealth and status. "Excuse me," the man said, his tone impatient. "I have an important appointment." "Manager, could you please resolve this situation quickly? This man is clearly wasting everyone's time." Victor's entire demeanor transformed in an instant. The contempt vanished from his face, replaced by warmth and difference. His voice, which had been hard and mocking just seconds before, became smooth as silk. "Of course, Mr. Harrison, I apologize deeply for this inconvenience. I will handle this matter immediately." He turned back to Keanu, and the warmth disappeared as quickly as it had come. His voice hardened again, now carrying an edge of threat. "You heard the gentleman. You are disturbing our actual customers. I am giving you one choice. Leave this bank now on your own, or I will have security escort you out." "I am also a customer of this bank," Keanu said quietly. Victor laughed a cold and dismissive sound. "A customer? Pacific Trust Bank serves people of status and reputation. We are not a charity." For he paused, looking you up and down once more with undisguised disdain. "For people of your kind. If you need money, there are plenty of pawn shops and check cashing places out there. They are more accustomed to serving your class." The insult hung in the air, naked and ugly. No pretense of professionalism remained. No thin veil of banking protocol, just pure, unfiltered contempt dressed in a tailored suit. Rachel Foster, emboldened by her manager's behavior, stepped closer to the counter. She made an exaggerated show of wrinkling her nose and waving her hand in front of her face. "He smells too. Probably has not showered in weeks." Derek Mills laughed openly. "Careful, Rachel. Do not stand too close. Who knows what diseases he might be carrying." The words were meant to wound, to strip away any remaining dignity from the man standing before them. They were the kind of words that reduce a human being to something less than human, something to be mocked and discarded. And yet Keanu Reeves stood there unmoved. His posture remained straight. His face remained calm. Only his jaw tightened slightly, the only visible sign that the barrage of insults was registering at all. Throughout the confrontation, Melissa Turner stood behind her counter, her face pale and her hands trembling. She had not joined in the mockery. She had not laughed at the cruel jokes or added her own insults to the pile, but she had not spoken up either. She knew what was happening was wrong. Every instinct in her body screamed that this was not right, that this was not how any human being should be treated. But Victor was her boss. Derek and Rachel were colleagues she had to work with every day. She had only been at this job for 8 months. She needed this job. She had rent to pay, student loans to repay, a life to maintain. And so she remained silent, her eyes fixed on the counter, her hands gripping the edge, her conscience screaming while her mouth stayed shut. Silence, she would later learn, has its own weight, its own cost, its own consequences. Victor signaled to the security guard who had been watching from near the entrance. Tommy Chen was 24 years old, fresh out of community college. Only 3 months into this job, he approached with obvious reluctance, his steps slow and uncertain. "Tommy," Victor commanded, "escort this man out of the building. He is harassing customers and refusing to leave." Tommy looked at Keanu. He saw a mid-league aged man in worn clothes standing quietly, showing no signs of aggression or threat. Then he looked at Victor, his supervisor's supervisor, a man who held his employment in his hands. "Sir," Tommy said hesitantly, addressing Keanu. "Could you please come with me?" Keanu turned to the young security guard. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, almost kind, as if he understood the difficult position Tommy was in. "Young man, I am simply trying to withdraw my own money from my own account. I have done nothing wrong. I have broken no laws. Tommy hesitated. There was something in this man's eyes, something in his quiet dignity that did not match the picture Victor and the others were painting, something that made Tommy's hand freeze before it could reach for Keanu's arm. Tommy. Victor's voice cracked like a whip. I gave you an order. Remove this man from the premises immediately. Before Tommy could respond, Keanu calmly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Victor snorted. Who are you going to call? The police. Go ahead. They will take one look at you inside with us. Rachel added with a sneer. Maybe he is calling a homeless shelter to see if they have a bed available tonight. More laughter from the staff. But Keanu did not call the police. He did not call a shelter. Instead, he scrolled through his contacts until he found a name saved as Catherine P.T. Bank and pressed the call button. He spoke into the phone, his voice shifting to a tone that was entirely professional, entirely businesslike, entirely unlike what anyone in that lobby expected from a man who looked like he did. Catherine, this is Keanu. I am at the downtown branch. I need you. Here immediately and bring Robert if he is in the office. The name Catherine caused Victor to pause. Catherine, which Catherine? It could not possibly be. Yes, they have refused my transaction. Keanu continued into the phone. Yes, I have provided all required documentation. He looked directly at Victor as he spoke the next words. No, I do not believe they know who I am. And I would like to keep it that way until you arrive. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Victor's confident expression flickered just for a moment before he reasserted himself. Who was that? Who did you just call? A friend, Keanu replied simply. You think calling some friend is going to change anything? Victor laughed. But there was a slight edge to it now. A hint of uncertainty that had not been there before. I do not care who you know in this branch. I am the authority. I am the one who decides who gets served and who gets thrown out. Me. Keanu looked at him with an expression that was almost peaceful. We shall see. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Victor stood his ground, but there was something new in his eyes now. A flicker of doubt that had not been there moments before. Derek and Rachel had stopped laughing, sensing that something had shifted. Melissa Turner trembled behind her counter, her face ashen. Tommy Chin stood frozen, uncertain of what to do next. And in the center of it all, Keanu Reeves waited. He waited with the patience of a man who knew exactly what was coming. With the calm of someone who held all the cards but saw no need to reveal them yet. With the quiet dignity of a person who had been underestimated his entire life.